Welcome to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, brought to you by Pilma. This podcast helps lead lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Here is your legal marketing expert and host, Ken Hardison.
Hi, this is Gracie Howes with Pilma. Let's hit pause for just a second on this episode because I have to tell you about this event that every forward-thinking PI firm should have on their calendar this January. It's the AI for PI Expo in Orlando, Florida, January 15th through 17th. This is the very first conference of its kind dedicated entirely to showing personal injury firms how to harness AI to save time, cut costs, and grow faster. You'll get hands-on demos, practical training, and access to the best AI solutions built for law firms. Reserve your spot now at pilma.org/AI for PI Expo via the link in the show notes.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grow Your Law Firm. Ken Hardison here, and today we have a special guest, Derek Weber. Welcome, Derek.
Thanks, Ken. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk a lot today about nothing but AI, artificial intelligence. And I got up with Derek through LinkedIn and talked to him, and one of our masterminds was using him out of Texas, Mr. Parker. I invited him to speak at our AI for PI Expo in January, and I'm excited to have him there. I read a lot of his materials. He is the guru, and he helps a lot of law firms figure out how to get started in this stuff. So welcome aboard, because this is something that I know PI lawyers need help with. I see it. It's something that's here to stay. And I'll ask you, why do you think so many firms are kind of backing off of it or scared to get started?
There's a resistance, and it's not just lawyers and law firms. There's a resistance across the board. And I'm not just some AI consultant. These are all things that I have a marketing company that I've been running for 22 years. And 2.5 years ago, we went all in on saying, we believe that AI and generative AI specifically is going to be the future of our industry. And so we have been rebuilding our business from the inside out with AI at the center. And what it's really about is how do we be human-centric and AI-powered? And so that resistance, I faced it, my team faced it, other people in other industries face it, because it is something new, it's something big, it's something scary. The biggest thing is there's so much noise that's out there, and it is so intimidating and it's so daunting. And that's where I think a lot of, I'll say, AI thought leaders, and I'll put that in air quotes, are doing a disservice to most small business owners and business owners in general, because they're out there talking about things that just aren't right and aren't real because they've never actually implemented and actually executed them inside of a business. And so when people watch those YouTube videos or they read those articles on LinkedIn or wherever it may be, and if they do have the courage to actually try what those thought leaders are saying, they get very frustrated and get very discouraged because it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because they're not making it work. It doesn't work because that advice doesn't work. And I see this all the time with the law firms that I have worked with and continue to do so, is really it's not about if it can work, it's how it can work. Because this is a tool that is really powerful, but you have to build it right. The first thing that you have to start with, and I'm seeing this with all types of companies, and lawyers are no exception, is most people are starting with the software, they're starting with the technology, and then trying to work backwards. That is the absolute last thing, and actually the least important thing. And this is where people are doing the software of the day, the tool, the trick of the week, and they're just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall, and not surprisingly, none of it's working. What the opposite of that spectrum, where I'd encourage your listeners to start, is first start with mindset. So you first have to start with thinking, how can I potentially use AI to help with this task? How can I use AI to potentially help with this project, and start looking at your business not as one big block of processes and procedures, but a series of small little blocks. And that when you build it brick by brick, block by block, that's what you have for your business. And from the same perspective, that's the mindset that you have to start looking at your firm with, is saying, this is a series of small things that if I take those out and create AI tools and trainings for, that's where there's huge opportunity and huge inroads that can be made. So that's where I think most people are getting frustrated. They're having a lot of resistance because the content that's out there, it's creating that level of fear and uncertainty, and frankly, it just doesn't work, and people get frustrated and throw their hands up.
And the thing, I talked to you earlier when I invited you to speak, is that I don't even know how to type. I still use AI probably every day, and really what you got to wrap your head around, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, it's not, I mean, you can use it for workflows, like how to automate certain parts of the business of the client's journey, but also in your marketing, also in your intake. So it's just so many places it can be used. But one place that I had never really thought about it that much, to be honest with you, and I'm using it more there than I ever have, is like a thought partner, where I give it scenarios and say, you're my consultant now. Help me figure out what are, ask me one question at a time, and to gather more information, and then give me some options. How should I tackle this problem? I've been amazed at. Now, is it all good? No, but you might get 5 options, and 2 of them are great, 2 of them are so, one of them sucks. But the deal is, I'd have never got those 2 great ones. You know what I'm saying? And that's what's turned me on to it. I don't know. Are you seeing people using it that way, or I mean, is that just
100%? And there's a progression that for AI to work really effectively for any of us, there's a progression, just like in all of our businesses. We're bad at something, then we get a little bit better, our abilities go up, and then that unlocks new opportunities and new potentials and new things that we can do. It's no different with this. And so what I've seen is, when I've created this thing called the AI experience levels, and there's 4 levels that I kind of see that are the progression that people work their way through. Is at first, in a kind of a 0 to 1 stage, they're resistant, they're against it, they're pushing back, they're saying this stuff doesn't work, or the robots are going to take over, and I'm not going to be a part of it. Whatever the reason, there's just resistance. And it could just be that, like, I'm too old to do this, or I'm too set in my ways. Once people get over that little hump there and get into the 1 to 10 phase, which is where I would say most people are when it comes to AI, this is when they're using it as a glorified Google. They're, instead of searching for something on Google, they're searching something in ChatGPT, and they're maybe using it once or twice a month, maybe a couple times a week. And that's where you have to start, though, just interacting and seeing. And then what ends up happening is there's some little thing that happens in one of those searches that makes you go, wow, that's really cool. And you have this breakthrough moment where you're like, there's more here. And you get over that hump, and then you get into this kind of 10 to 100 phase where you start using AI as an assistant. And this is the space where I would say where most business leaders who are, and when I've talked to lawyers who are using AI, this is where, when people are using AI on a consistent basis, this is where they usually are. And this is when you're using it as an assistant. This is where you are really starting to, instead of delegating to an executive assistant or your admin, you're delegating that same type of work to AI. So you might be working on a legal brief, and you just throw up some notes and put it in there and say, hey, shape this up, make it sound better. Or maybe you're sending an email to a client, clean this up, make it sound more like me. There's a lot of ways that you can really shave off some time by doing this. And it's a pretty easy and safe space to play, because you don't have to think any differently. Instead of delegating to an assistant, an executive assistant, you're just delegating to AI. And here, the key that people start focusing in on to be successful is starting to focus on, how can you generate higher and higher accuracy in the results that you're getting in those chats. Because the worst thing, like you said, when you get 10 ideas, most of them are kind of garbage, but maybe there's one or two that are decent. That's okay when you're brainstorming. It's not okay when they're actually outputting work that you're trying to just go copy and paste and hit send. And so this is where, once you work on that mindset, then you start working on your approach on how you're approaching your prompts and you're approaching your inputs, and you start realizing that you've got to provide more context, more inputs into this approach. And so that's where you start adding documents or paragraphs. And like you said, like you start working on prompt engineering, but also you're starting to realize that if I add information about my firm, then it's going to be more relevant and more specific to me and to my firm. And when you start adding that context, that contextual input, you actually start getting much more accurate results, and it becomes much more useful. And this is the time where people are progressing from that 10 to 100, and they're starting to get more accurate results. They're starting to have their go-to prompts that they've got, that they maybe have in a document that they're copy and pasting. Or like, for example, when you said, ask me one question at a time, act as a thought partner, like these are all little contextual inputs that are prompts that allow the AI to know more about what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to accomplish, and you get much more accurate results. And once you start stacking those on top of each other, then it becomes a little bit more cumbersome to try to keep all those in order, or you're like, I just did this in 3 other chats. And this is where people start experimenting with AI assistants. And when I use the word, instead of just using it in a regular chat, now they start looking at assistants. So that'd be a custom GPT, a Claude project, a Gemini gem, like those sorts of little ecosystems. And then that's when you're starting to progress to that upper level of that stage. And now is when you start like, oh, if I add in all my training docs into this custom GPT, and I have in the instructions those standardized prompts that I like, that saves me a ton of time. I don't have to go back and forth every single time. And now I'm getting much more powerful results on those answers. And when they get over that hump, now you enter into that 100 to 1,000 range. Now this is when you're starting to use AI as a partner, and you're really starting to get that exponential impact, because you're starting to unlock things that you never knew were even possible because of so many things going so much quicker. And so instead of spending, a couple hours preparing a document, you now have that templated and it can output that really quickly. You have time to think differently. You have time to open up the opportunities to focus on bigger and more important things. And so this is where you start using the accuracy, and now you start focusing on consistency. And so now that same, I know one of the things that I talked with a lawyer in Iowa, and he was saying, one of his partners was using it and saying, all right, I'll put this brief based on these notes. And he's like, it was fine, but I still had to spend, 30 minutes editing what it output to make it match what it needed to be. When you get to this stage, now you've got your contextual input, you've got the specific task that's thin sliced in a way that makes the role what you want. But now you can actually start focusing on those structured outputs. So now instead of just, here's some information, give me a legal brief, now you're saying, all right, here's some information, and here's a template of how exactly I want you to structure this legal brief. Here's the title, here's the information that needs to go on the top, here's how I want this section written. And now all of a sudden, with the information, the task, and the structured output, now you're starting to get some really consistent outputs that are accurate to what you're looking for and what you want. And that's where I see major breakthroughs in people's productivity and in the way that they're approaching their business. Then once you get great at doing that, and you're building all of those approaches into your business, and now once you start to figure out how to use those assistants really well, you start to learn how important training is, because that's the root of all LLMs. That's the root of all these tools and processes and systems and everything, is getting the right training documentation. Because if you provide the right training documentation, you provide the right input, you provide the structured output, almost anything is already possible with the way that these models are built. And once you're able to build those trainings in, then you can start stacking a lot of these assistants on top of each other. So you may have one assistant who has specialized training in analyzing your sales calls. So you have a new potential client that calls in and you've got a recording of that call, and you can create trainings for an assistant to analyze that sales call, to understand how good of an opportunity it is, to provide feedback on how well you handled that call, how you could have done it better, and what next steps should be, and to also output the specific email that you should send that prospective client. Like, those are all things you start stacking on top of each other and start working well. Then, and only then, should you start even considering automation, because the worst thing that you can do is automate chaos, because that's where most people are trying to say you should start, is through software and tools and automation. But if there's no foundation and there's no training, there is no chance that you're going to get what you're looking for out of that. And in fact, there's a high likelihood that you're going to automate chaos into your business and actually do damage.
And I'm asking this because I'm not an expert on this. Is there, like you were talking about Gemini, Gem, or whatever, but then that's not the same thing as an AI agent, or is it?
That's a great question. And this is my opinion, the vernacular that I use, because it's one of those things, if you ask 10 people, you're going to get 12 answers. The way that I've delineated is that you've got chat, which is when you just log in to an LLM like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or Copilot or all of the different ones, and you're just chatting. There's no context, no structure, no anything. One level up from that, then I say the one level up from that is an assistant, which would be the custom GPTs, the Claude projects, the Gemini gems. One level up from that to me is then workflow automation, which is your Zapiers, where you're having connective things. A lot of people will say that is agent automation, but to me, like, those are things that you have to prescribe specific if then that logic to it.
Yeah. Right.
To me, that's not an agent, that's automation. And so then one level above that is you have agents. And so agents, I would say the difference between an assistant and an agent is an assistant is human prompted. So you put in something, or you are the trigger to have it do something. Then it uses the LLM model to reason and come back with through its own learning and provide its response. Versus an agent is triggered either by an activity or by another agent. And so it's non-human triggered, but still uses its own reasoning and rationale to come up with its response. Versus workflow automation could be triggered activity, but there's no reasoning model, no rationale. It's got to be hard coded. And so that to me is the difference between really those three. But to me, there's those 4 steps.
And so here's the thing I hear lawyers all the time, PI lawyers, they're worried about the client confidentiality, and they're worried about the HIPAA with the medical records and stuff and Social Security numbers. Now, this is just me here and reading. That's why I got you on this podcast. That's why you're coming to speak at our event. I've heard there's a something called compliant AI. I've heard that there's stuff that you can close it in like Teams, and then it's your stuff and it don't go out into there. And then I've heard other people say, yeah, but they say really you can't stop it from going out there. What's the truth?
I would say the truth is you can opt out of all of, like, you can say, do not use my data as part of the training model. You can do that even within your custom GPTs or Claude projects. There's also an element of, it's kind of like the same way of, Amazon says that Alexa's not listening unless you tell it to. And I think we all have received messages and advertisements that would probably point to the contrary. So there is certainly, I would say, some exposure to any information that's put into these LLMs on the highest level. There are already tools that you can use that sit on top of the LLMs that are that lock that down and make it compliant. And then there's also a lot of opportunity to use scaled down models of all of them. You can download versions of them and have your own, kind of like the equivalent of, you can have servers in a rack in your office versus using in the cloud server. There's the same opportunity to do that with AI, is that you can actually purchase and download your own personal LLM and then build everything in and on top of that. And frankly, most of those models already are strong enough to do more than anything that right now we would need them to. Those are definitely all options for HIPAA and other sorts of compliance.
What's some of the names of these things that you said on top of it?
Yeah, I think there are, I've not researched any specific tools, but I know they're out there where there's specific medical and legal compliance ones out there. I would say also do your research, because there's a lot of companies out there slinging tools that are really just fancy marketing wrappers around LLMs. So I would say go in with some skepticism, because it's rightly earned. But there are so many things that you can start off with as a law firm that you can create a lot of operational efficiencies without even like tapping into the medical records or the legal compliance side of things. There's just a lot of ways that you can increase those efficiencies and stay compliant.
Well, see, I've learned so much today. I mean, just in this short little bit. So what are you going to be talking about at the AI or PI conference in January in Orlando?
Yeah, super excited to see you in person in Orlando. That's gonna be a lot of fun. So we're going to be there's going to be two sessions. There's going to be one main session, which is going to be how do you go from 0 to 100 in 90 days? But we're going to compress that down to how do you go to 0 to 100 in 90 minutes, because that's what we'll have on stage. And so we'll go through some of these frameworks and methodologies and mindsets that it takes to be successful and to start making those progressions. And the goal is, no matter where you are in your AI experience, that we're going to be moving you to at least 100, which means part of that is we're going to be live building a custom GPT Claude project during the talk, during the workshop. And so this is going to be a fingers on keyboard, working through specific opportunities to try to break through any of that fear, any of that resistance. We're going to work through how to build a virtual advisor. So you could, we all have those thought leaders or those mentors that we wish we could chat with or text with. Well, that's what we're going to build in the workshop. Is I'm going to share the tools that it takes to build the training to build that virtual advisor, because that's the approach that we take at Lead with AI, is not to give a person a fish or even teach them to fish, but we want to teach you how to build your own fish farm, which means all the tools and methodologies that we figured out what's worked in our marketing company, reverse engineered it, distilled it down to make it industry and company agnostic. Those tools are what build the training that help you build the assistance that you need for your business. And so that's really my goal, is to elevate the lawyers that are in the room to be able to say and see that this is something that's actually really approachable. Because once you get into it, you realize it's not as daunting and as scary as you may think. And once you start to move down that path, you really start to see what's possible.
Sounds good. And so we were talking at the beginning, we're ending up now. Anything I didn't ask you that I should ask you that's important that our listeners and viewers should know about?
I think maybe just one other mindset component is that I think a lot of people start first with what they think they can automate and then they try to use AI to automate something. What I would challenge your listeners, and I would challenge the lawyers that are out there, is to think about what is the work that you're doing and your team is doing that is necessary, but not high value and not very fun. Because to me, that's the place to start, is not in the high value stuff and trying to automate that. Start in the low value stuff that gets in the way. We all have that work that ends up, I was talking with one attorney in Texas, and he was saying he spends 4 or 5 hours a day working on administrative, on emails, on billing, and he's a smaller law firm, but they're spending half their day on non-billable work. Like, that's the stuff to really start focusing on. All right, how can we make that 4 to 5 hours be reduced down to 30 minutes or an hour a day? And now you freed up an extra 3 or 4 hours a day to work on high value, high billable work, or that creates the space to think more, to have more strategy time, to be more intentional about what you're doing. And so I think that's the thing that I would challenge everyone listening is, like, what's the stuff that you have to do that you don't want to do? Or what's the stuff that your team's doing? That's the high leverage opportunity is, and that's when I say human-centric, AI powered, is this isn't don't use AI and think of AI as a subtraction tool. That's where a lot of big companies are, I think, missing the boat on how to use AI. They're using it to extract and subtract, while small business and medium-sized businesses are using it as a multiplication tool. How do we get ourselves and our team to be able to do 3 times, 5 times, 10 times more high-value work than they're currently capable of doing? And that's how small firms are going to be able to go toe-to-toe and head-to-head with firms that are almost untouchable right now, but will soon be within reach.
And you said you had a special gift for our listeners.
Absolutely. So like I said before, I think if you're still in that 0 to 1 or 1 to 10 phase and you just haven't, or even if you're beyond, and just what I've seen is that oftentimes it's really hard to just get our heads wrapped around what AI is capable of doing inside of our businesses. And so one of the things that I often do with people who are interested in joining one of our memberships is I'll just do a demo where I'll do research based off of their website, their LinkedIn profile, and have it a tool and trainings that I've build a strategic partner for their company. And then I'll work through a business challenge that they're facing. And it absolutely blows people's minds of what those tools or assistants are capable of doing with publicly available data. And so I'd love to offer that to your listeners. So if they go to leadwithai.us/PILMA, so leadwithai.us/PILMA, PILMMA, there'll be a form there that you can fill out. And all it's going to ask for is your name, your LinkedIn profile, your company name, company website, and a virtual advisor or a thought leader or business leader who you would love to have the perspective of. So those 5 things, and I'll build a strategic partner assistant for your company, and we'll schedule a time to walk through, and just so you can see the power of what's capable with publicly available information. And then imagine what it can do with highly trained documents that come from you and your company.
And if they want to get it, would you just go to that website?
leadwithai.us/PILMA.
All right. Good deal, man. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in person in January. Until next time, this is Ken Hardison, dedicated to your success.
You have been listening to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, the podcast that leads lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Go to growyourlawfirm.com to find more ways to market and manage your law firm. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.